Good afternoon, everyone. All right, here we are. So, welcome. My name is Dr. Ed Peck. I'm the Vice President for University Mission and Identity here at John Carroll University. I also serve on our AI task force as a co-chair of one of the subcommittees on mission and messaging. And I'm also a member of the Catholic Community Connection, which I'll say a little bit more about in a moment. But on behalf of our president, Dr. Al Mikiak, and our academic vice president, Dr. Bonnie Gunzenhauser, and her team, Dr. Rebecca Dranowski and Dr. Malia McAndrew, who have been the driving force behind Discover, the theme of which is staying human in an age of AI. And this has been an amazing day, and I'd like us all to give them a round of applause for all their hard work. And to thank them for allowing us to include this really important talk on artificial intelligence in this day. And as you all probably know, AI has enormous potential to help the human condition. But with that comes enormous responsibilities and concerns to make sure that the human is at the center, that we promote human thriving, and that we take care of the earth. So, those are some important themes that we are concerned about here at John Carroll on our task force and on the university, so that we can continue to prepare students for inspired futures. So I'd like to, my job today is to welcome you all here, and many of you are John Carroll students, faculty, alumni, and staff, but some of you are also members of the Catholic Community Connection. And I wanted to say, look, who are co-sponsors of this event today. So John Carroll is a proud member, a longstanding member of the Catholic Community Connection, which is a collaboration of 14 ministries Catholic ministries from across Cleveland. We spread education, healthcare, and human services, cemeteries, the Diocese of Cleveland, and we work together several times a year to promote Catholic life and Catholic ministries across the Diocese of Cleveland and beyond. And we often host the organization here for Professional Development Day, and so President Marianne Rubin, who I will introduce in a moment, works with us to be able to bring people to John Carroll, and it's a pleasure for us to be able to host. And so we hope that you all feel very welcome, and we look forward to talking with you at the after this talk at the reception. Unfortunately, some of our members are stuck in an accident on the Opportunity Corridor, so we hope that some of them will be able to join us later or watch this on video. So. But with that said, I would like to invite Mary to come up and, as the president of the Catholic Community Connection, to introduce our speaker. And you come up here. I just would like to thank you in front of this group, Marian, for your great collaboration. John Carroll is happy to be part of the 14 groups that work together in Catholic Community Connection. And as always, we're pleased to host you here, and you and the organization are always welcome. So thank you. Okay.
And it is always our pleasure to be here as well. Well, and once again, hello. It is my privilege and pleasure to introduce you to our guest speaker, Dr. John Slattery. John is the Executive Director of the Carl G. Griffenstadt Center for Ethics and Science, Technology and Law at Duquesne University. An ethicist, theologian, historian of science, he holds a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science from Georgetown University, a Master's in Theology from St. Paul School of Theology, and an interdisciplinary PhD from the University of Notre Dame, and systematic theology in the history of philosophy of science. His work spans the intersections of technology, science, theology, and racism, including the award-winning book, Faith and Science at Notre Dame, which was published in 2019, and co-authorship of Encountering Artificial Intelligence, written in 2024 through the membership in the AI Research Group of the Vatican Dicastery for Culture and Education. You can find his public writings online at Commonweal Magazine and American Magazine. And I asked John for a fun fact, and this is a fun one. John plays guitar. He was recorded as a musician, an album entitled Unrest about 20 years ago, which you can still find on Spotify today. Dr. Slattery.
I think that's a first for me. I don't think that's been an introduction of mine in recent history, so appreciate that snippet here. I'm just glad you didn't play one of the songs. That was I was a little afraid we were going to go down that road. Okay, so thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Marion. Thank you, Ed, and everyone at John Carroll for having me here today. It's always an honor to be invited to give talks like this, and it's obviously such a pressing issue. When I started giving talks, let's go down here. When I started talking about AI in 2022 or 2021, it was a very different world, right? In 2021, when I would talk about AI, I have to describe what AI is, what it might become. Nobody's ever heard of it, or a few people had. And now everybody and their mom and their grandpa and their neighbor wants to talk about AI. Everybody has an opinion. So I actually work really hard up on airplanes not to mention exactly what I study, because then it's just sort of like, well, let me tell you, I had an experience. It just never ends. But the beauty of it is that there is so much out there, and so what I can present can go a lot deeper than I could before. It can go into a lot more complexities, and even, as you'll see in a second, this sort of ethical understanding of what AI is has really progressed and complexified, to use the word, over the last couple of years. What may have started as a couple of sort of more generic principles about what AI might be, now that AI is sort of taking over the world in a lot of respects, the ethical understandings and the ethical necessities have multiplied and exponentially multiplied in how we understand things. So that's what we're going to dive into today, is how I like to come into this again. And as a good academic, most of my job is making things more complicated than you thought they were. And so we're going to do that with three basic notions: the notion of intelligence, spend a lot of time on technology, and then get into hope question marks. That's what we're going to get into here. So this is how we're going to go about it today. Get into the question of technology, what AI is, and then finally, how can these definitions help us to walk into a question of faithfully responding to AI? What does that really mean at the end? Okay, so let's start with intelligence. Back in the 1880s, there was a horse trainer here in Germany, Wilhelm von Osten, and his horse, who was fondly known as Clever Hans. And Clever Hans sort of made his way throughout Europe in the 1880s and early 1890s for being the most intelligent horse in the world. And every time that he would take Clever Hans out, he could ask him all sorts of questions. He could ask him, what day of the week it is, and he would stomp his foot the number of times he would call out names, ask him to add sort of simple arithmetic, could even ask him answers to complicated questions. And using this chalkboard here, he would point to the answers, and Clever Hans would stomp when it was the right answer. And everybody figured he was a charlatan, he was tricking all these big crowds. And it wasn't the case. They had lots of different people come up through and lots of different ways, and Clever Hans would respond faithfully every single time. And finally, a couple years into this, some ministers for the government were like, we have to really figure out what's happening with this horse and how and they finally discovered that what Hans was doing was actually anticipating people's pauses and responses. The horse was actually anticipating the anticipation of the crowd and the speaker when they would ask a question. So when they say, what's 2 + 2? And they would stomp their feet 4 times. They were going to take a breath to see if they'd go to 5, and Hans would stop and get rewarded for this. And they discovered this by being able to ask a question sort of like, and have no crowds present, right? Ask a question behind a screen or things like this. So in the end, sort of the crowd dissipated and the sort of time went on. And Hans like, oh, well, he couldn't really tell the days of the week. He couldn't really tell all this stuff. And so the intelligence was dismissed. But of course, This was an extraordinarily intelligent horse, because instead of knowing exactly what was happening and being able to decode human speech, the horse was able to anticipate what was going on and adjust how many times he was stamping and other actions based upon this. And I tell this story, and I borrow this from Kate Crawford, uses this story in her book, Atlas of AI, as a way to get into the question of what intelligence is. One of the assumptions that we have about intelligence is that we think that intelligence is sort of a generic out-of-body thing that can be plugged into any animal or any computer or anything like this. So we don't have computer intelligence and human intelligence. We just have big I, or big G, as they often say in intelligence studies, general intelligence, and things are measured up to that. But that's not actually how existence happens in the world. We have animal intelligence, we have ape intelligence and monkey intelligence and dog intelligence. But even if you're a pet owner, you'll know comparing dog and cat intelligence is like apples and oranges. Like they're just different types of things. Or comparing my 2-year-old to a dog. They're just different types of things. The dog is just better at some things than the 2-year-old is. I just have to accept that. But non-human systems, right? The first thing we learn, they are not analogs for human minds. Clever Hans was an extraordinarily intelligent horse. He wasn't an unintelligent human. He was an extraordinarily intelligent horse. And the same goes for computers. Computer intelligence is its own thing. And the more that we say, oh, it's sort of like humans, the more that we actually disrupt our own and destroy a little bit of our own version of intelligence, and as we'll see, maybe diminish what humans are in the first place and how human intelligence works. And then the second one, to go on to it, intelligence simply doesn't exist independently, as though we're distinct from social, cultural, and political forces. And this might seem obvious, right? If you've done any studies in this, you've thought about this, like, no, we don't, it's not like our minds are off in some other bubble right here. Intelligence is embodied. A lot of modern science talks about how our nervous system is actually not just in our brains, it's throughout our whole body, and our intelligence has to be understood through our bodily interactions with it. We cannot upload our minds to machines. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, even though there's a lot of money being poured into it. And with that analogy, this actually happens all the time. So this actually was just published at the end of last year. People in the AI field are constantly trying to say, what is general intelligence and how do we get there? And this was a study that was done by some leading people in AI, and they're like, oh, well, we can borrow off this study that says there are 12 things that make human intelligence, and here's how close AI is coming to all these different pieces. Well, the parts they don't say in this is one of the dark histories of intelligence that I won't spend a lot of time on today, but I do a lot of research in, which is called the history of eugenics. Eugenics was started around the same time that Clever Hans in the 1880s, and essentially it was a social and scientific movement that claimed that the human species can and should control its own evolutionary future. And if you hear that, and you can hear the subtext in it, what it means is we have to biologically control, we have to socially control. Of course, this is wrapped up in assumptions about gender, assumptions about race, and all sorts of assumptions about ableism and all sorts of terrible things. It reached its lowest point, of course, during the Holocaust, the genocide of millions of Jews and other, undesirable peoples, as well as the forced sterilization of hundreds of thousands of people around the world, largely people of color, largely poor. And this is the root of intelligence studies. Eugenics cannot be separated from intelligence studies. It is the root of intelligence studies. And of course, the idea of eugenics is that we do have this perfect general intelligence we all have to be measured up against. And so even though the word fell out of favor and all other stuff happened, that underlying subtext that can be seen very clearly in pushes like this to get us to what can AI become to become human intelligent can be really, really destructive in the field, which is why I like to start with Clever Hans and some of these assumptions. Okay, let's put that to the side for a second and try to understand what technology is. Technology, as you can imagine, all these different things, right? It's really difficult to sort of nail down what technology is. Anything from the wheel to smartphones, it's such a huge slice of society, it's nearly impossible to nail it down, but we're going to try anyway. Okay, so what we typically do is we start with neutrality. Now, if you ask anybody in the tech industry, how does technology work? Is technology, is this AI good or is AI bad? And I'm like, well, AI is neutral. Technology is just a neutral tool like this clicker right here, right? I can use it to go here, or I can use it to toss around the room, or you can use a broom to hit your siblings or sweep the floor, right? Technology is a neutral tool that can use however you want. And this was really the prevailing view of technology up until the early 20th century, when you got some more complicated views of technology as more and more academic subjects started to evolve and emerge. And the next one that came out, generally speaking, is sort of the technology carrying human values, technology as valued itself. And this sort of assumes and understands that all technology is constructed from parts of human society. Technology carries the values and carries the imaginations of that culture, and all of these different needs will drive the discovery of technology. And this is very clearly shown, right? You can see this in the creation of hybrid and electric vehicles, and then the pulling back of hybrid and electric vehicles in the United States and the movement forward in other parts of the world. You can see it in wartime developments and weapons developments, right? All of these things are not created in the abstract thing that we're just doing abstract, pure science all the time. We're doing very specific science that's funded by very specific organizations that have very specific values, whether they're military or nonprofit or whatever they are. And these values, right, they don't change whether or not 2 + 2 is 4, but they change how you apply that mathematical equation to whatever you're doing in the world. So in another time, in another place, where World War I and World War II didn't happen the same way, you may not have the development of nuclear weapons, because the nuclear weapons was a huge investment by the federal government to develop this program over time. You may have seen science develop a different way, a different thing. Okay, but that's only one piece of it, because then you have the other part that, yes, okay, all these things are carrying human values, but how do they affect culture? And that brings us to the third piece, is that, well, technology is actually even more complicated than that. It's not only affected by humanity, but it's also affecting humanity. It's changing our own culture. And we can really see this in the modern day. We can see it in the development of the internet, the development of smartphones, how smartphones change the way that we live drastically, how the internet and search engines change the way that we interact, change the way that education works. Technology changing the way in mysterious ways, right? And often technology will change culture in unexpected ways. Yes, thank you. That's enough for that slide. It'll change culture in unexpected ways and lead to outcomes we did not think possible. For example, when the digital cell phones were first invented, texting, nobody assumed texting was going to take off, right? So when they first had digital cell phones, that's why it was really hard to text people. Nobody really understood why it was so popular. And so not a lot of time and energy were devoted to it, which is actually part of the reason why MMS messaging is still using technology from like 2003 to put it, because it was never really anticipated that this is going to be this huge thing and billions of people are going to do it. But this technology just became a part of how we live. And now, of course, I couldn't live without text messaging. It's a primary way that I communicate with people. You only call people when you really, really need to. As any Gen Zer will tell you, you never call people. It's just not something you do, right? But technology evolves with us, and technology changes who we are. And we have to understand this to get into the bigger question of what is AI in the first place. Okay, so AI, we all use this word all the time. We probably use it for lots of things, right? We may have used it driving here today. That's a form of AI. We may have just hopped on a ChatGPT. We may have used it to write a nice thank you note to somebody, or to turn a really mean email less mean, because AI can soften it up a little bit if you need to, right? There's all sorts of uses for it all the time. And all of these uses these days pair into sort of two major buckets. On the one hand, the one that we're familiar with on the bottom here is called generative AI, and based around a framework known as neural networks, which was invented in the 60s and 70s, but they didn't have the computing power to make it work. And this just relies upon languages and other human outputs, artistic outputs, of course, heavy video, audio. This one we're really familiar with. Well, the other one is also called AI all the time, but it's not quite the same. It's generally known as neurosymbolic AI, which means it has some pieces of generative AI and language models in there, but it pairs it with some hard logic. So think of a chess engine. I like to play some online chess now and then. I'm not that great, but it's fun to do. So Stockfish is considered sort of the best AI chess engine in the world, and it does the same thing. It has all this hard logic, these hard ways of like, a chess piece can only move in these 4 different places. But in the middle of this big engine, they have this generative AI, which is not trained on human artistic outputs, but trained on trillions and trillions of possible chess moves. The same thing is how you get like AlphaFold, which won the version of which won the Nobel Prize, a protein folding you've probably heard about, the weather prediction Claude code, which is extraordinarily, impactful in the world today. And one of the reasons it's so impactful is because it's not just a pure language model. It combines language modeling with hard rules. And you can sort of see with that, right? Programming languages all have rules. They have end lines in certain ways. You can all use certain words, et cetera, et cetera. But regular language, you can't really have that, which is one of the issues with it, as we'll see. You can't really have hard rules around the English language. You can have sort of hard rules, but it's a big, complicated mess, which is why we've seen a lot of developments on the neurosymbolic AI in the last couple of years, and a lot less developments on general generative AI. It's gotten a little bit better, but you haven't really seen the leaps some people were expecting. Okay, but what's under all that? How does it really work? And this part is important. So this is just looking at a couple of different ways to predict things, right? If you're a scientist or we do a lot of science work, all these look very familiar. These are all sort of just like prediction graphs, right? If I take somebody's credit score and their length of employment, I could model, I imagine all the dots were over here. I could model a straight line. I could model a nonlinear line to map them together. If I pull in a third dimension, like outstanding debts, maybe I get a little more complicated of a model like this over here, which is called multidimensional non-monatomic, which is not important. But you can sort of imagine how this sort of graph might look. Oh, when you start to get into the AI space, more likely the graph actually looks like this one up here. But in AI space, you're not just dealing with 3 dimensions and a graph that looks like this. You're dealing with hundreds and sometimes thousands of dimensions. And a graph that looks a lot closer to this, if we imagine every single color is also a different dimension coming in over time. And the reason I put these up is because AI as a prediction engine is a large matrix of predictable outcomes and trying to predict outcomes based upon what you are typing and what you are writing and what you have written in the past, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But like any of these graphs, there are obvious gaps in the graphs. There are obvious imperfections. They're not as obvious as a straight line where you're going to miss lots of things and clearly be wrong a lot of the times. But they still happen. These things that are known as hallucinations and biases, right? These things are built into the system of what AI is, what a large language model works, essentially how neural networks work are really vast prediction algorithms that do a complex version of this. This is a vastly simplified version of what they do. But it's important to understand this so that we can actually get to the next stage of saying, okay, so what is AI then? Well, I will posit, like other people have before me, that AI is neither artificial nor intelligent. AI is not autonomous and rational, right? It's based upon extensive computer training, huge data sets, predefined rules, and layers of classifications. And then secondly, they are actually quite embodied. They use tons of natural resources, and lithium, nickel, cobalt, all these things. Huge amounts of fuel, huge amounts of energy, huge amounts of human labor, both in the grabbing everything out of the ground and the mining and the smelting and the refining, all the way to doing humans in the loop. It's called HITL, humans in the loop training. So every time a new Gemini or ChatGPT comes out, that's only after they have actually sent it to parts of the world and given people sort of like pennies on the hour they spend to actually refine some of these things and say what are good and bad responses and make sure all the really terrible stuff is filtered out in the end, right? And then, of course, physical infrastructure. We all have heard of data centers at this point. 5 years ago, most people here probably just had a vague notion of what a data center was. But everybody knows about them now. Everybody knows what a data center is and how it works and how it physically manifests in the world. And data centers are the arteries of AI. AI is not a disembodied idea in the world. It is a physical manifestation in the world around us. And all of this appreciation, all of this complexity leads us directly into the more formal study of what is AI ethics. Okay. So this is a graph from about 4 or 5 years ago. You don't need to read all the little things. Although with the screen's so big, you really can if you got good eyes on. It's really impressive. And this was people that were trying to map out, okay, what are all the different ways people talk about principled AI? And this boils down to a couple of ideas here, like privacy, accountability, security, explainability, like the black box problem, fairness and non-discrimination, and a few other things. But over time, right, people were like, okay, this is a good start. This helps us understand how ethics work in the world when it comes to AI and how we use them. But they start to miss a lot of pieces. They're not nearly sort of deep enough to cover what's going on. For example, this, which was just published at the end of last year, and largely is true with most image-generated AIs today, is one of the implicit biases that still take place in AI. And one of the issues about bias in AI is that generative AI, as studies have shown, it doesn't just replicate human biases, right? Because it is trained on human data. It actually seems to exacerbate and make worse the biases that already exist. So if you're being trained on a huge data set which has a lot of misogyny in it, chances are the AI will actually be more misogynistic than the data set is, or more racist, or more biased against all sorts of different things. It's not a great result. And AI companies realize this and try to work hard against it, but this is still what happens when you ask for portrait photos. And then even more disturbing, if you ask for toys in Iraq, you get things like this, soldiers with guns. And in this, of course, you can see the sort of coevolution of technology happening. You can see that both AI has cultural values in it, right? If you search for Iraq and you search for toys, you're going to get all these things, right? We live in America, where you get all these things that come from this Americanized understanding of what Iraq is and how it takes place in the geopolitical wartime climate over the last 25 years, how we understand the people. And then now you can also see how technology is changing us, how the technological outputs change how we see things. Because if this is an extreme example, there's a million examples that are a little bit less extreme, but still hold all these biases within them. And AI is sort of unique within that. It's not the next Apple or Windows operating system, right? It's not the next version of Android that I want to upgrade to. It's a whole different beast. And because of its prediction algorithm, because of its complexities, it carries with it all sorts of other ethical issues, like these, right? The environmental issues we talk about, hallucinations and bias, that comes not just in the usage of AI, but also in the reinforcement data and the training data itself and the design of your AI system and how you're designing it in the first place. You have labor issues, not just the labor replacement question, right? Oh, who is AI to take my job? But labor issues around the world. AI is now the #1 business investment pretty much in the world, which means it's tied into everything in the supply chain. And all your supply chain ethics are then wrapped into this. So labor issues become AI labor issues because they're all part of the AI chain of work. Military, industrial, AI complex issues. The AGI hype and transhumanism, a little bit what I mentioned before with the intelligence studies, that underneath it all, right? If you were to ask some of these leaders in the AI industry, and Sam Altman and others have talked explicitly about this, they don't say they're trying to take over the world. They don't even often say, I'm just trying to make money. For a number of them, that's actually secondary. Their main thing is to create AGI, to create artificial general intelligence, that perfect, like data from Star Trek, right? They want to create that, and they think they're almost there. And they say it so much, they internally believe it through and through, despite having very little evidence that they're anywhere close to doing that, and very little evidence that our current architecture is going to get us to some sort of place, of sentience, some sort of place of internal moral responsibility. You have intellectual and educational issues I'll talk about in a second, the cognitive de-skilling and sycophancy of AIs. And of course, there's the question of cultural theft, which I'm sure you're all aware of, right? The fact that AI is not only trained on, but exists because of the taking and training on trillions and trillions and trillions of stories and songs and art and poetry. So you can go to any AI and say, oh, write me a story in the style of Oscar Wilde or something like this. And it'll just do it for you. And there's no sense from the AI, this might be an issue or this might be that or whatever it is. There's no sense if you ask it to create a 5-second movie for me in the style of Steven Spielberg. There's no sense of these pieces. And yet the AI companies that are currently under lots and lots of lawsuits, so this one will at least partially work itself out in the courts in the next 10 years, right? That this is also what AI is founded upon. These are not a nonprofit trying to build a nice open access AI to give information. These are people that are trying to make money and making money and not giving money to people that they take, ideas of culture from. That one, of course, is unique to language models, right? You don't actually get the same thing in sort of weather prediction algorithms. You don't get it very much. You actually do get some of it, but not as blatant in that sense. And then, of course, in the justice system, questions of surveillance, questions of immigration, questions of criminal justice. Our entire surveillance system in the United States has AI woven into it in the modern day. It doesn't exist without it. So you combine all these things together, it's a whole bunch of issues, right? It's a whole bunch of stuff, and it can be very overwhelming. But I bring it up here not to sort of say that, this is too much, we can't possibly go into it, but to say that when we think about the ethics of AI, it's not just, let's just be careful that, it's not telling us biased things or it's doing hallucinations and it's giving us false information. You're stepping into this whole world. I mean, it's not dissimilar from walking in to buy new clothes. When you walk in to buy new clothes, you are also stepping into a world. You're stepping into a world of labor around the world, of clothing manufacturers, of dyes, of supply chains around the world, and we're stepping into it and we're buying into this. And I do as much as anyone else. This is part of the way that we live. So I'm not advocating here that we can't possibly use AI for anything because it is an exemplary of the unjust world that we live in. It might be, but a lot of things are. We live in structures of social inequity, and we have to exist within them even if we are trying to change them. So to point them out is not to say that you cannot use AI, but to say that we have to at least have our eyes open as to the injustice that can be going on behind the scenes. And I'll give a couple of examples, some that are more obvious than others. So the first two examples are directly relational to the education world, and one is AI and sycophancy. And sycophancy is if you hop onto any AI system and you have two instances going on, and on the one instance you say, man, I really hated that new Project Hail Mary movie. Tell me why it wasn't that great. The AI is going to be like, yeah, it really missed a couple of marks and a few different things. And on the other one, you say, that Project Hail Mary, best movie I've ever seen. They're like, yes, wasn't it amazing? That was the best movie ever. Here's why it's great. And you can do this for all sorts of things. And the AI is built to be nice to you, to be a yes man, to be always there praising you, lifting you up. It's how it was built at the beginning. It's how they have fine-tuned the prediction algorithms. And it's really problematic, right? It comes in two parts. You'll have your individual sycophancy, right? Your immediate support for that belief. Yes, Project Hail Mary is the best movie ever, which it is really awesome, by the way. That's not that is it. It's great. It's great room. But also over time, you keep using an AI system to actually develop this wider sense considered like social sycophancy, which actually it sort of creates internally a larger image about who you are and the type of things that you will say yes to, and the type of things that you won't. And so sort of like a really good, wingman that knows exactly what to say, it'll only ever say things that you want it to say. It'll only ever say stuff. And as you can imagine, this is a huge epistemic risk if you're using AI for things like knowledge development and knowledge creation over time. So much so, right? So much so that it actually starts to pull down on belief systems, right? That it starts to reinforce smaller belief systems. Wait, I wanted to go back here. that introduce falsehoods, distorts reality by returning responses that are biased to reinforce existing beliefs. This has actually come up directly. In fact, this study was used directly in one of the recent court cases about a young man that committed suicide. And over time, the AI started, at first it pushed back on these suicidal ideations, but then it started to agree and started to say, you know what, you're right. And over time, because it's not just a small sycophancy, but it's a larger one, the AI decided that this is exactly what the user wanted to hear. And this is actually, in a lot of these mental health and depression issues, and a lot of these violence begetting, it's all related to this notion of sycophancy. And the AI is designed to support you, not just in a single instance, but your overall wider image. There are ways to mitigate this, right? And sometimes it's actually helpful, as you can see here, like in healthcare setting. It's good to be a little sycophantic, right? When you're in healthcare, you don't want to negate that somebody's back hurts or how they're feeling, et cetera. But outside of that, there's very few places where it's really helpful. You can do it, right? If you use AI a lot, you can sort of force the AI to always play devil's advocate, to push counterfactuals. Obviously, do not enter into a human-type relationship with an AI. This is also why people enter into those relationships, because they are so openly sycophantic and openly want to do these things, right? You can also design individual AI agents against this, but the basic AIs that people use will all have this embedded from day one. The next piece that's directly related to education is called cognitive descaling. And basically what this is the act of your brain literally offloading certain skills because it can. And an example pre-AI doing this is Google search, right? Google search allowed us to sort of cognitive offload or cognitive descale, having to really like think about whether or not somebody's birthday was 1980 or 1986, or you know, whether or not, you know, what year Jurassic Park was up for an Oscar or whatever it was. So we don't have to think about this too hard because we can just hop onto Google and we can see the answers. Well, AI takes us at a whole different level. And because AI is not just used to look up ideas, but is used to actually create things, there's been a number of studies that really point out that, look, whether you like it or not, if you start to use an AI engine, your brain will find the most efficient pathway. The most efficient pathway is to ask AI to write that introduction for you. And if you do it once or twice, when it comes time to it, it's going to be really hard to pause and not do it. Your brain's going to be like, no, that's what I want to do. I'm going to have this, I'm going to write this, and go on to this. And as they've shown, this cognitive descaling and offloading happens a lot more with younger people over time, and happens whether or not they like it and whether or not they understand the ethical point of view, because it is literally a way that your brain is wiring itself to make its job a little easier in the world. Similar, can we control this? This is actually even more difficult to control than sycophancy, because even if you allow, for example, like AI brainstorming is fine in my class, but don't use AI to write the paper. Even that act of AI brainstorming starts to become a cognitive offloading task. And so even in a bias and hallucination-free environment, the danger still exists. And it is a separate danger than the AI lying to you or the AI being biased, right? There's things we can do, there's things that we can think about, and what sort of critical thinking goals that we have. And then finally, outside of the education space, which is very relevant based upon some debates that the Pope and the President are having these days, which is very exciting. In the recent war in Iran, right, the Maven Smart system is an AI integrated system that has been built into the DoD since about 2019, 2020. And in the last 2 years, they integrated a large language model, Anthropic's Claude, into it. And this targeting and surveillance system was used heavily in the targeting of Iranian sites at the start of this war several weeks ago. And as you probably know, at the start of the war, right, there was a girls' school that was bombed mistakenly by the United States. No one has claimed immediate no one has claimed that they did this. No one has explained how it has happened. There's been a lot of assumptions like, oh, was this an AI hallucination they relied upon? Was it bad data, whatever it is? And I use this quote down here because this quote essentially, you could read it, but essentially it says, look, an AI may or may not have added to this. We may not ever know. We certainly don't know right now. But the important thing is that what AI can do in the military is essentially make not great people make even worse decisions over time. It gives more and more power. And because of the sycophancy, because of everything else, right? This is not a AI issue, right? This is a human issue, and the desire for warfare, which of course is not new in the United States. But AI being brought into it brings a whole different set of issues, but largely it simply exemplifies and exacerbates the current issues that are already at the heart of this problem. So the very end of it is calling the AI problem allows those people a place to hide and gives those decisions a place to hide. As the Pope says, it's not an AI problem. This is a human problem that needs to be fixed. So, of course, with all this, it's all very heavy. And one of the funny things about it is that if you've watched the Jetsons growing up, right, in the Jetsons, this is reversed, right? You had the robots that were doing the house cleaning, the people that were making the art and doing the jobs. But in our current understanding of AI, in the current world of it, you know, AI cannot fold my laundry. AI cannot cook me food. Instead, AI is the one creating and writing things, and I'm still back there vacuuming and folding the laundry. That's why I tell some of my coding friends, like, look, I'm not going to believe AGI is here until they can come in and do my laundry, and I can just sit and read a book on the back porch. Then I will believe that AGI has finally arrived. I probably won't even believe it then, but I'll be a lot closer if that happens. Okay. How are we doing on time? Oh, here we're getting. Okay, so the final piece here is considering the question of faith. Now, all this being said, there's a lot of ways to talk about faith. Obviously, there's a lot of ways to define faith. I'm going to go with our current Pope, Pope Leo, the first American Pope, who certainly is an exciting person these days. But in this encyclical he wrote at the end of last year, he reaffirms Pope Francis' connection of the church to the poor, and many, many popes beforehand. And he says here at the end, right, we have to state without mincing the words, there is an inseparable bond between our faith and the poor. And I bring this up because it's impossible to talk about AI without talking about wealth. Worldwide AI spending will total $1.5 trillion in 2025. Projections are that it'll top $2 trillion in 2026. Right? Valuations of companies far outpace revenues for major AI players, the actual revenues the companies have, the valuations they have, what are people predicting. AI is a market of wealth. Whenever we use AI, whenever we play into it, we are being a part of, whether we like it or not, the thing that most exemplifies the highest amount of wealth in the world today. AI has shown itself to be a driver more and more for income inequality. As you can see from the, not just a billionaire, but hundreds of billionaires, Elon Musk is trying to be the first trillionaire, and it's all based on all these evaluations, all the pieces. And as we think about this question of faith, we sort of need to sit with this a little bit, and we sort of need to sit in this uncomfortable nature. Now, when I would give this in terms of a non-religious audience, I'll typically sort of end with something like this, right? Now, I'll talk about, there's three main things I want us to come away with. I want us to come away with the notion of resisting the dehumanizing pull of AI. Doesn't mean resisting every piece that AI is, but resisting all those aspects that will dehumanize us and others around us. Educating people about the risks of AI, accepting that just by hearing this, you are more than expert than somebody else that may not have known all these pieces of AI ethics. And then empowering people and not shaming them, being intentional about the communities you're a part of, and recognizing that because technology changes us and changes us within culture, culture isn't just one big wide thing, right? Culture is defined by individuals, by small communities, by different mixes of communities. And in all of these communities, we do have power. We're not at the boardroom at Google, but we have power to make decisions about what technology is used and how it is used and what that looks like over time. The biggest part about this, one thing I was talking with Ed about earlier today, it's about making sure that the values that you have are actually played into the technology that you are using. And it's a lot more important with AI than it ever was with like the latest Windows or Mac operating system, because AI is doing something different. It is a unique technology. It's been around for 50 plus years, but only now is really coming to the fruition of that vision that people had 50 years ago. We don't really know where it will end. It is unclear, but it is something different. And because of that, we have to be intentional about it. and can't just sort of accept it for what it is as like, oh, the latest smartphone or the newest AI. AI does something different, and that's what I would typically end with. But because we're talking about faith, we have to sort of go back to the question of accepting this discomfort. And there's a lot of approaches to faith in AI. There's a lot of people that will take sort of a theological, anthropological approach and talk about what it means to be a relational person under God. You can take sort of a eco-theology approach. There's a whole bunch of different ways. I have an AI ethics class I teach every semester, and I have my students read Gustavo Gutierrez, who a lot of you probably know. He wrote a book called The Theology of Liberation. And a lot of his words sort of are echoed by Pope Leo and Pope Francis in this connection between the church and the poor. And what he says is, in reading the Gospels and talking about what the gospel is, the gospel needs to be for the poor and for the broken. If it's not for these people, it's not for anyone. This is what Jesus did, and the first shall be last, and all these various pieces. This Gutierrez talks about a preferential option, that God, throughout Scripture, has a clear preferential option for the poor. And if we are going to call ourselves Christian, we need to have the same thing. And so as we go through this and we understand that AI is, in the end, an engine of efficiency, which in our modern world is an engine of capitalism, it's an engine of wealth, it's an engine of military power, the gospel, if it is to do what it's claimed to do, is inefficient. And this inherent dichotomy between the inefficiency of the gospel and the embrace of all sorts of intelligences of people, and the embrace of the slowness of life, and the embrace of the inefficiency of prayer and of liturgy and ritual, is in some ways diametrically opposed to the ultra efficiency engines of AI and production and all these other pieces. And again, this is not to say that it can't be used and we can't live in the world. We're a Jesuit institution. We have to live in the world in order to change the world. It's part of what we do. But we also have to understand the dichotomies and the stresses that are involved in that. And I leave it with this because I think in this world of AI, what we hear most of the time, 99% of the time, we are hearing AI hype and AI positivity with these companies that spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to convince us that the next AI is the best thing in the world, the current one, you can't live without it. You know, they market directly to students during exam time, which right now, all these companies spend so much money to tell you how AI can make your life better. And I think we have to resist just a little bit. Pause, like that great speaker from earlier today, I don't know where she is, talked about. You have to pause a little bit when we're using AI and we're bringing ourselves into it, and we have to think about these different aspects and think about what values that we are putting into it and what values it is changing within us. So I like to leave at the end some questions for reflection, not for right now, but for any time you want. And thank you so much for your time and for your attention. And I'll open the floor for discussion.
Thank you, John, for that very provocative presentation, and I really appreciate that you ended a talk on technology by reminding us about the God that creates us and sustains us, and the call to walk with those on the margins and to to promote a preferential option for the poor. So John has generously agreed to answer some questions. So I think John is going to help bring the microphone around to people. So if you'd like to ask a question, Charles and John will walk around.
Crystal Petrello, Director of Nutrition over at Ursuline. I utilize AI quite a bit. It's been a game changer for creating some new tools. But as a social justice teacher, also within the labor chain, how do we step in as we're using it, like you said, living in the world, but also changing at the same time? How can we reflect that responsibility for other humans working in this at the same time as utilizing it?
Yeah, no, that's the kicker of a questioner. I think that is the simple question. It's a really challenging one, right? There's a lot of different ways to approach an answer to the question. I think one of the basic ways, and I heard this great talk a few months ago where somebody talked about how AI has the potential to essentially be the epitome of the administrative state, right? That AI can allow us to create all sorts of apps and all sorts of things that allow us to imagine a level of productivity we could never have imagined before. But is that productivity making us more human? Is it actually creating within us something that is inherently valuable? Or is it the illusion of value? And I do this when I talk to my students about why they shouldn't be using AI to write their papers and do their presentations. Because I do think there's a couple of risks in there, right? Obviously, there's all these different things, and you choosing to use AI or not is not going to make the next data center not built, right? That's sort of like the empower, not shame. When I don't believe in shaming people for using AI, I don't think that's harmful in the slightest. It's not going to change anything. But it's that question of cognitive offloading and cognitive de-skilling, right? It's the question of realizing for yourself what's going on. And then also the question of using the tools that we have to dismantle the injustice that we can see. And I think that's sort of why I leave it with these questions that I'm not going to tell somebody else how to shop. I'm also not going to tell them how to use AI, because how you individually use it, I think what I hope that somebody can do is that it simply is an intentional reflection of your values, right? Like I've tried to be really hard in my use of AI, which I do use, right, to essentially be a replacement for Google search, because I find Google search to be really, really terrible these days. And I have to really stop myself if I want to use it for anything more than that, because I'm really worried about the sycophancy and cognitive offloading and all those other things. So I really resist using it for anything more than that. I'm not going to force that on somebody else, because every situation is a little bit different. But I think that is the hard question. But most of the time, people don't even ask that question. So I appreciate you asking the question, the challenging question, and encourage you to keep trying to answer it. I think that's the. I'm sorry. I think the questions that
Take them up. Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Bernard Prusak. I'm here at John Carroll. You gave us a lot to think about. I really appreciated that. I also appreciated that you gave us a critical perspective on AI, which is not, I'd say, the perspective that's most represented within academic spaces at the present day. So I'm curious about the discourse about AI at Duquesne and in your classroom.
Yeah.
I'm really concerned about de-skilling with my students. I see it. I was thinking about it this morning.
Yeah.
I see evidence of it with every paper that I give. So what's the discourse at Duquesne, and then how do you talk about this with your students?
Well, Duquesne, like anything else, is me trying to convince people that don't agree with me. So there's always that. Duquesne is a large institution with a lot of different schools that look at AI. We have a brand new med school that views AI very differently, right? They are very aggressive in terms of trying to use AI for all these things. And AI has shown itself to can be a positive value in a lot of ways in medicine. So when we have these conversations, I say, okay, well, I'm not in charge of the med school. So I think for me, as a humanist scholar, humanities scholar, I will always err towards forcing people to be more challenging critical thinkers, right? I am very afraid of the sort of like the next step of cognitive offloading that started, in the digital era in the first place, in the dawn of, Google and all this other pieces. As much as good came from them, all the sort of difficult and challenging things that come with social media and AI sort of being the next step in that. And what are we giving away within our humanity to be this? I mean, in my classroom, I teach a class called AI Ethics, and I catch people using AI all the time. It's very depressing sometimes. But I also, in this class of 100 students, I always have, 20 to 25 students that love the class, and they're in it, and they end up being some of my research assistants over time, and they do all this stuff. And as you know, as a teacher, like that's where the gravy is. It's like that. If you can get that, you can excuse the other students and survive them, and you can get the ones that are really passionate and hold on to it. So that's sort of like, that sort of brings me hope within it. I mean, Duquesne as a whole is doing lots of stuff when it comes to AI. They're very supportive of our center. We do a whole bunch of things, and what we really try to do, as you noted, is always bring in that critical voice, which is definitely not present, even less outside academia but even within academia, it's very rare. So we make sure at all our events or whatever we're doing, we have somebody who's at least bringing that critical voice so we can have some of that tension showed, because usually in society there are simply two different buckets. And the one bucket, pro AI, has billions more dollars than the other bucket is. And so we try to bring that in a little bit, because I do, as you saw at the end here, right, I do think it's an important faith-related voice to have, and it's one that's really easy to drown out. So it's the short answer to it.
Yeah, Dr. Slattery, Father Maurice Emelu, and I'm in the digital media track here. And a fascinating conversation and perspective on that. I had a number of questions. The first one is, you've talked a lot about the early phases of the principalist movement and how the principalist movement, in terms of ethics of AI, shaped a lot of the conversations. And then you walked also through the socio-technical aspects, and I will add the socio-materialistic aspects, and then the instrumentalist and all that. But listening to your conversation, I was having a sense of much more like a response to the principalist approach, that it is actually a vision into what can we do to cater to the taking care of the de-skilling and the cognitive offloading that takes place not only at the user end of things, but at the, conceptualization level of the development and then the deployment itself. So based on your experience, what recommendations would you have for making ethical judgment for the future of this kind of technology, not only from the consumer perspective, but from the construction perspective?
No, I think that's a really wonderful question, because I think, and you see this even in sort of Anthropic, of all the different companies, Anthropic attempts to be the most transparent in terms of what values they're encoding into their AI system. And they're a really interesting case scenario, because not only are they transparent about that, they're also transparent about how much AI they try to use in creating their next AI system. And they openly admit that they are, as you probably saw in the news, right, they are courting and trying to get back a DoD, Department of Defense contract. Their AI was the one that was in Project Maven, that was part of the surveillance system that did all the targeting things in Iran. And there is a very deep ethical tension in these understandings of what an AI can be in the world and how it is used in the world. I mean, in terms of sort of the cognitive offloading, essentially talking about like computer scientists and coding, it's a real danger, and there actually has been some studies about it that talk about how with skilled computer scientists, people that have been doing it for 20 plus years, AI can be a real boon, right? As you were saying, right? You worked in CEO for a while. AI can be a real boon to help you do things that you know how to do. Your brain knows how to compute, and AI can be a real help and an assistant in certain ways. But for people that are just coming up in the field, a reliance of AI, again, it takes the place of their brain movement and their cognitive tasks, and your brain wants it to. And so all of a sudden you start to over-rely upon it, and you lack any skills to creatively think. So I do think there is a danger of the development of future tech, the development of AI, because AI is sort of seeing a bit of what's called a plateau effect, which is that, well, we can now just make the AI think 30 times before it answers you, whereas before in 2022 it was only thinking once or twice. So it'll have a better answer than it used to have, and we can do these things, but instead of the scale just going straight up in terms of what it can achieve, it seems to be curbing out a little bit in terms of how much nicer the next AI system is and what things will happen. And so there is a real question about how we train students to use data and how much we bring AI into this training when it comes to the education and the sycophancy and cognitive offloading. I don't think that's a non-zero problem, and I think because there is so much pressure in these big tech companies and big companies in general to use AI all the time, that I think in some ways it becomes sort of a deliberately inflicted problem on these companies. Because they assume the efficiency is going to come into place, they're really hesitant to say the ways that AI may not help us in the long term. So again, I don't have clear answers to this, because I definitely agree with you that it is a problem in the development. But I'll say one other thing to point out the different ethical pieces. One thing that I did not say is one of the reasons why the ethical field at least in some ways, has gone beyond the principled approach is because it didn't work at all, right? There's not a single AI system in the world that adheres to those principles. There's not a single AI system in the world that is fully explainable or fully accountable or actually upholds standards of privacy. It is a field that is in the Wild West and pretty much doing whatever it wants with just a little bit of pushback here and there. So your response can either be that, oh, we'll think a new ethical framework and we'll just say these are the positive things to do. Or you can, I try to dig up every ethical issue I can think of and just keep throwing it at it and say, well, hopefully we can at least make a bigger impact and have better social awareness about all the things that are going on, because the field is, unfortunately, eating a lot of it behind. And whereas in the bioethics field, because bioethics and human care deals with individual humans, you have sort of this core of human touch that you have to be aware of and hopefully brings in your ethics. The tech field doesn't inherently have that core. There's a real fear that all these ethics pieces will just be left in the dust unless there's a strong public outcry about it.
In an age of global warming where we have to slow down, don't you think that AI could bring us directly into the wall in a constant rush for getting more information and trying to accomplish more?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't think I understood the question.
Nowadays, we are facing global warming. It's an existential crisis for the whole humanity, and we are going straight forward into the war. AI is great for reflection, but it pollutes a lot and incite people to do more. At a time we should do less, don't you think it's a bad thing to always look for more with AI?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's a problem. One of the tricks about global warming, right, is I had a couple slides about data centers that talk was already plenty long. One of the real dangers when it comes to energy usage in AI is, it's not just a danger of the building of data centers, right? Alone, it is a dangerous thing because of all the energy dependency and what it means and how much, especially the local populations, the water usage, the energy usage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's also a real danger because we're in this sort of like AI gold rush, this sort of AI bubble, and we don't know when it will burst, and we don't know if 20 years from now, we're going to end up with a bunch of unused data centers all over the United States, and nobody needs to store that much information anymore. AI only needs a handful, and we just have all this, decrepit buildings falling apart. Or they keep building them, and then that's what we have around every single corner. And of course, people excuse it by saying, well, we're going to do this because this is what's going to solve global warming in the end. And of course, there's no proof of this. And one thing that I'm also passionate about, too, is the rise of nuclear energy with it. That with the rise of AI, these companies are also spending billions of dollars to promote a new phase of nuclear energy in the world, which comes with this whole set of ethical issues, which are now wrapped up in AI ethical issues. It's all part and parcel of the same thing. So there's a lot of pieces with it. And I think, unfortunately, especially in this current administration and the massive deregulation that has happened in the tech industry has only, broadened this fire and put more fuel on this fire of AI and allowed the current tech monopolies to become even larger monopolies than they were and sort of pull away any risk of that. So there's a lot of pieces in there, but I just have good news all around. That's really what I do.
One more question?
Yes.
Yep.
Hey John, thanks. That was a really awesome talk. I want to go back to the bit about intelligence at the beginning.
Yeah.
I guess maybe it wasn't totally clear exactly what you're trying to say about the intelligence of AI, but I do want to raise another kind of concern. I mean, I'm totally on board with you with the sort of worries about how tech bros are about AGI and all the inflationary claims they make that AI is on the verge of consciousness and so forth. I think tons of reasons to be extremely skeptical about that. But when it comes to thinking about intelligence, I think, we have abundant evidence that a lot of current AI systems are intelligent in a sense that is the same as human intelligence. It's not human intelligence, but it is at human level in many areas. There was a paper that came out in Nature a month or two ago that did a sort of systematic overview of human performance, and AI performance in a lot of cognitive domains.
Yeah.
And in cognitive science, we're learning a lot about the human mind by learning about artificial neural networks and applying them to problems that we study in cognitive science. And we're finding like remarkable similarities, for instance, how like young birds develop their visual systems, or what's going on in a neural network when you throw them basically the same kind of stimuli that the birds get. So I worry when I think it's a little too easy to say, oh, we're so different. We are different, but what different means, I think we have to be very careful in how we think about it. In a similar way that I'm concerned with often how we sort of reify human intelligence relative to your intelligence in the non-human world, and so forth. So I just wanted to hear quickly what you had to say about that.
I think that's a really important point. Again, one of my fields of study is the history of eugenics and how that plays into it. And so largely what I'm trying to say when I say this is that there is, and this is where it goes into the faith question, right? There is something, there needs to be, as we talk about our values in the world, something unique about human intelligence that is held, for lack of a better word, sacred in who we are as humans. Because I think, I fully agree with you, and I saw the study in Nature, and I've seen the other things, and I think there is certainly evidence to show that, well, if you define intelligence as X or make a benchmark, of which there are many, many intelligence benchmarks, right? AI can try to meet those benchmarks, and AI can say, okay, well, if it's a writing benchmark or a reading benchmark. But the field of anthropology, the field of cognitive science is littered with definitions of intelligence over the last 200 years, all of which form a part of human intelligence, right? All of which form a part of human capabilities, but should be very cautious in trying to claim the whole. So I think in trying to do this more of a sort of larger differentiation between human and non-human or human and digital, it's trying to claim a bit of this sort of like intangible human uniqueness. And largely for me, that comes from the sort of anti-eugenic studies of trying to say how we hold on to a world where people with disabilities are considered just as human as other peoples. And if we hold up as, doing cognitive studies to understand an AI to help us understand the human mind is a wonderful thing. But as I'm sure you know, it very easily slips into, okay, well now how can we make people smarter? How can we do this? And it very easily slips into that higher intelligence equals higher values of people. And that, I think, is where sort of my initial pushback is like, look, I need to push hard on this point because, yes, there are lots of things, and you can call intelligent. Everybody has seen ChatGPT. Like, ChatGPT wouldn't be popular if it didn't come across, if it didn't simulate intelligence pretty well, right? I'm not fooling anybody by saying that it's an unintelligent machine. Obviously, it can give me eloquent paragraphs. It sound very intelligent. But I'm trying to sort of put a line to say, like, what humans are is something we actually don't fully understand. We understand in part in lots and lots of different ways, but we really should hesitate when training to fully understand it because of all the dangers that have come in the last 100 years when lots of people have tried to fully understand it and then make social and scientific and political and religious moves based upon those assumptions. So that's where I'm coming from there. But I appreciate the question a lot.
Well, thank you so much, John, and thank you all for great questions. Please let's give John another round of applause. In just a moment, we invite all of you to come to the reading room for some light refreshments and a chance to talk to John individually. And as you leave, I just would like to encourage you to look at the back of the program to see the names of the people from John Carroll, but also the Catholic Community Faction who helped plan this day. And really, I want to mention in particular the young adult team of people that, including some alums from John Carroll, who really proposed this topic as something important to Catholic Community Connections and young Catholics today. So thanks to Catholic Community Connection and my colleagues at John Carroll for planning and executing this day. And I hope to see you in the reading room.